There are today about 10 million renters in the UK. Something like 2 million of them are children. There's about 4.5 million households. And what we're seeing is a tenure where there are no real regulations that are enforced on conditions. There is no real security of tenure, and on average they're paying 40% of their income on rent. But this lack of security of tenure means that people are moving their kids from school to school every 6 months or 18 months or something like that. And so you're creating a body of people who have no money and no security of tenure and are building no assets, and can't afford to save up for a deposit. And some of these people are extraordinarily vulnerable. 1 million of these people ought to be in social housing. And there isn't a single child that should be living in this country without secure tenure, without their parents knowing that they can stay in their home for the long term. And so there's a huge line, a gulf growing in society between those people who have assets and those people who don't have assets. And those people who don't have assets are getting basically poorer and poorer. Even relatively wealthy people are getting poorer and poorer because they can't escape the rent trap, and the most poor people are simply being milked. It's very hard to say whether the major parties care about renters or not, but it's clear that none of them are prioritising them. Basically, the best figures are that we need something like 2.2 million homes over the next Parliament, including 1 million backlog today. And not one of them is proposing to build those homes that we need. Gosh, Prime Minister for a year. Right, I would put a tax on rents. Now, it sounds like it will make rent go up, but rents aren't set by costs, landlord costs, they're set by supply and demand. So there aren't any landlords discounting the rent hugely because they've paid off their mortgage. So the reduction in cost doesn't lower rents. So if you had something like a 22% rent tax, then landlords would have to pay that 22% tax on their rental income, but that would raise £9 billion, and I would hypothecate that for building social housing. And if you had £9 billion, you could put 100,000 council and housing association houses a year, and that would make a huge difference to housing availability. And of course, if you did that, you would take 100,000 households out of the private rented sector and put them in the social rented sector every year, which would bring rents down because there would be less demand. So the first thing we need is basically a lot of social housing built and paid for by taxing landlords' income.